Welcome to Space to Lead, the podcast where leaders and teams come together to learn, grow, and thrive. I'm your host, David LeBlanc, and every episode will explore fresh insights and strategies that inspire leaders to create dynamic, engaging cultures. We'll dive into conversations with leaders and industry experts who are transforming teams and shaping the future of leadership. Whether you're leading from the front or working within a team, Space to Lead is here to spark ideas and help you lead with purpose and passion. So, take a deep breath, make some space, and let's lead together. Welcome to Space to Lead. My name is David LeBlanc. On today's episode, we are speaking with Shoko Masuda. Shoko is a seasoned leadership coach with over 20 years experience in Fortune 100 companies. She specializes in empowering humble, ambitious women and blends her global experience with traditional tea ceremony principles to offer unique insights into leadership. I had the privilege of meeting Shoko when she participated in a team coaching training program, and I was always impressed by her grace and style and the way that she carried herself. I'm so excited to share some of her insights with you today. Shoko, I am so excited to have you here for this conversation today.
Thank you so much, David. I love to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, I have to say, we met, of course, during team coaching training program. I've thoroughly enjoyed taking some time reading some of your posts on LinkedIn, and I've been particularly curious about this tea ceremony. You've been sharing a lot in your writing and in your post about some work that you've been doing, talking about things like mindfulness and habits, and I'd love to hear more. What is it that drew you to the tea ceremony?
Well, you'll be surprised. I started my tea ceremony practice when I moved to US. I didn't do it when I was in Japan. Tea ceremony itself seems, at that time, I was young, so I felt like it's very old-fashioned, and there are a lot of rules that I have to follow. And I felt like, not really for me. But when I came here, abroad, everybody asked me about Japanese culture, particularly something like tea ceremony. And I felt like, oh, gee, I should know more about my own culture, right? Right. So that's one part of it. And then another aspect was that when I first moved outside the country, I always thought that I really don't want to be perceived. I was promoted, I was selected because I'm a Japanese, because I'm a Japanese woman, but because I was competent, right? So that was so important to me at that time. So I really downplayed my being Japanese so much. But one time I realized that people said to me that, hey, Shoko, I'm so interested in your ideas because your perspective is very different from American perspective or any Western perspective. And I realized that moment, like, gee, maybe I should share more my Japanese background so that might give others, stimulating their thinking, so to speak. So then I came here, start learning more about Japanese tea ceremony and any art form of Japanese culture. It could be tea ceremony, it could be flower arrangement, it could be judo. Those things, we call it the way of tea or the way of flower. The way is really the way of living. And there's no ending, meaning it that you constantly learning through your life. And I like that aspect of it.
Yeah, so that's where that habit comes in that you talk about.
Absolutely. And I think, when I came here, you know, everybody told me, that, Shoko, you have to speak up in the meeting so that you show your value, your worthiness in the meeting. And that was very overwhelming or even intimidating, you know? But in the tea room, even how smart you are or how senior you are, what kind of position you are, everybody is equal and everybody just be as an individual, sharing that space, sharing that quiet moment. And I thought that was such a lovely way to share the moment together. And I like that one.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that you started exploring this way of the tea when you came to America. How long of a process is it to get practiced and what's the word I'm looking for? To be able to perform the tea ceremony. How long of a process is that?
So you're talking about the length of the each
Length of time.
session?
Yeah, because you
Each
mentioned
session?
coming to a new country when you were younger and starting this process of learning. So it sounds like this has been something you've been doing for a while.
So I would say that now that this is, try to remember, it could be 12 to 13 years, and I'm just novice compared with other people. Some people really doing decades and decades. So, and that's why there's a no ending.
So the sort of that way of being that you talked about.
Yeah.
Nice, beautiful. And when did you start making the connections between the ceremony and leadership?
So, uh, you know, there's the principle of tea ceremony, which said harmony, mutual respect, clarity, and equanimity. So those are the principles that we were taught by our teachers. And if you just think about the current environment right now, the world is VUCA, volatile, uncertain, um, complex, and ambiguous. We definitely need some clarity. We need calmness in our minds. And we also need mutual respect and harmony in the meeting room or anywhere. I found that this principle is so relevant when I was reading some tea theory book, but also, as I said, in the tea room, everybody's equal. When we get into the tea room, you bow into the room. And that's the indication that your humbleness and your politeness and your respect to the others. And I thought that this would be very important in the corporate life because sometimes when we hear the word DEI, you start wondering that why we need to be mindful about DEI, why we have to think about different people or different aspect of people. Simply because we want respect any differences. We respect those people as an individual, not stereotyping. And within the tea room, that's what we do. So
Mm.
that the moment I felt like this principle is incredibly important
Oh,
for
beautiful.
our contemporary life. Does
Yeah.
it make sense?
It absolutely does. And while I've never participated in a
Mm.
tea ceremony, I've seen it on on TV and these type of things. And one of the words that you described, you talked about calmness, and that's even through a screen, I would get that feeling of calmness, of peacefulness, of silence. Can you expand a little bit more on that idea of silence? Because I know it's something you've talked about in the past.
So as you described, even just watching that tea ceremony from somewhere on TV or something, you can see that people are very calm and in silence. And being silent to me is very important. There are two benefits of it. One is for yourself and for others. So let's just, think about that. When you're in silence, or you take just a pause, what's happening? That's really that give you the space for yourself because you're not rushing to anything, right? So that pause or silent moment give you a space for yourself. And what happens when you have that space, even the 3 seconds or 4 seconds, that help you to be aware what's going on yourself, your emotions, your thinking. That is self-awareness, right? Particularly when you're anxious, when you are in the heat of the moment, shall I say. But if you pause, give you your own silence to yourself, give you space, you feel that, am I upset? Am I angry? Or am I disappointed? Or am I just annoyed? What's going on? Right? So that was more like metacognitive moment for you. That's that self-awareness. And as we all know, as a coach, that self-awareness is always all the starting point.
So true.
Right? And that will give you have to do that because that moment you feel I'm in charge of my emotion, I'm in charge of my thinking, and that help you to self-regulate if necessary, that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So that silence would do for you. And silence also would do for others is you give them space. So this is the moment that I had, when I was in the corporate life, I was in the meeting with the CEO and I was a little bit anxious because in the US, everybody said that you have to speak up, you have to show your, worthiness, whatever. But when I look at a CEO, he was very quiet. Very quiet. He didn't say a word, or he even didn't interrupt anybody. But his body language, his eye contact, really telling that he's paying attention intensively to each individual who speak up and say something. But he is not dominating by speaking constantly or anything. He's very quiet. He given that space to us because he knows his power, his impact. So when you're a leader, you have to be aware and you have to give the space for others by giving the silence to the people. And that's, to me, related to the creating the psychologically safety environment. And that will be the foundation for diversity and inclusion.
Mm.
So I think the power of silence is very important for contemporary corporate life if you think about what's happening right now in the world.
There's a lot of noise in the system. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious, what advice would you give for a leader if silence makes them uncomfortable?
That's interesting. You said, let me ask you this question. Why you think silence makes a leader comfortable? Do you feel uncomfortable when you're in silence?
Well, and I've been guilty of this myself, and I've spoken to leaders who sometimes feel the same, that they feel this need and sometimes even a pressure to fill that space. So to me, that need is rooted in discomfort with the silence.
So I was reading the book, I think Justin Zorn and somebody else co-wrote The Golden. And in that book, they identify people really feel silence. There's something that they want to avoid because they afraid of silence. Not only uncomfortable, they are actually want to avoid silence. And partially because, as you said, we do have the urge to fill in. And we also, in this Western world, we grown up with all those kind of expectation, particularly as a leader, that you have to speak up, you have to show the way, you have to direct people, all kind of things, right? But also the silence create or indicate unknown because you don't know when there's a silence. What's happening, right? That unknown probably give people, as you said, uncomfortable feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly in the conversation, you feel like awkwardness. And yet, it is incredibly important for us to use that silence with the reason that I mentioned. So how those leaders who feel uncomfortable or have that urge to fill in, this is a very simple thing. It's that we sometimes use a similar thing. I think you probably use a similar kind of thing. It's that just to count three before you say anything. This is the kind of the practice you have to train yourself because it's not natural for those people. And even me, now living in the US for 15 years, I constantly have to speak up. I constantly have to, but as a coach, we train to be a better leader. I mean, better listener.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, still, we constantly have to train our brain 1,000, 2,000, and 3,000, and then this. And also the breathing is always helpful. So that you do have 3 big, deep breaths. So those are the kind of things that I would say. But first and foremost, you have to be aware what your behavior is because sometimes people will not notice.
Love that. Love that. Very, very simple techniques that a person can use to start to create those pauses, to create those moments of stillness. And I would add to that piece about self-awareness. Sometimes what I have done in the past and what I sometimes encourage my clients to do is seek someone out who they are in meetings with regularly that they can say, "Hey, Shoko, can you just notice and observe me in this meeting?" And then provide me feedback afterwards to help take something from that they're not aware of and move it into they're aware of it so they can start to refine and practice. Love that. Love that.
Oh, I love that
Yeah.
accountability partner kind of thing.
Yeah. 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 So it's clear from our conversation today that it's really important from your perspective that leaders create space and silence from which to observe both themselves and others. You also referenced, someone who is quieter and maybe when you came to America felt this pressure to speak up. What message would you give to those quiet leaders out there?
So I may say that there's nothing wrong with the quiet leadership style. And the leadership style, it should be molded by yourselves. So I just looking back when I was in the corporate life, I was uh, trying so hard to fit into that this Western model, much more I would call it. I don't want to sound like um, uh, just giving this some kind of bias, but I might say masculine style, very decisive, boom, 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 So just thinking about the Japanese culture is very polite. And as I said, silence, we call it silence is gold. And everybody always, respect the senior people, right? Now that here, everybody has to be go, go, go. So I felt that I really try hard to fit in that form, but at some point I realized that's not me. So I think each individual has to sort of come to terms with who you are and how you would leverage that strength to create your own leadership style. And quiet leadership can be very effective as well as vocal leadership, shall I say. And I think this is where using your strength, most of the time the quiet leader are very good listeners and use that as a superpower.
I love that. I love how you made that connection to this idea of quiet, more introverted, and being a superpower. So, this idea of really embracing who we are, celebrating who we are, and then stepping into our power. Love that. Shoko, that's such a beautiful way to close the conversation. And I feel so bad saying we're closing the conversation and that I feel like we just really touched the tip of the iceberg. I feel that there's so many insights that you have to share from your leadership practice, from your coaching practice, and also your practice of the tea ceremony. Thank you so much for creating some space for us to have this conversation.
Thank you, David. It's such a lovely way to start the year for me. So thank you.
If you would like to learn more about Shoko and the amazing work that she is doing, you can find her on LinkedIn or her website, hksmconsulting.com. Shoko also referenced a book in our conversation today, and that book is Golden, The Power of Silence in a World of Noise by Justin Zorn and Lee Mars. Be sure to check it out. And thank you for joining us on Space to Lead. Please tune in next time. See you soon.